welcome everyone. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our call number 73, the surprising resurgence of Impact First Investing. I am Zulema Bibo, co-founder and chief operations officer of Impactalpha. We're delighted to have you here today. We have a super full pack hour ahead, so we want to make sure we get going. Just a few reminders and housekeepers. The call is one of the many benefits of being an Impactalpha subscriber. So thank you all subscribers for being here. If you haven't joined us yet, we invite you to join the Impactalpha, the Agents of Impact community. You can do so at impactalpha.com/subscribe. We have lots of great offers, lots of free newsletters as well, if you're unsure, but I think after this call, you'll be convinced and you'll come join us. So please check us out at impactalpha.com/subscribe. We are recording this call and the recording will be available next week. So look for that in the brief. We'll have the video recording and a call recap. So if you miss anything, you'll be able to catch it then. We are going to have the chat feature available. So if you are not new to this, you know that we use it. Feel free to introduce yourself, share resources, and ask questions. We'll be monitoring the questions. Try to use a Q&A feature for this so that we can stay on top of that and ask that to the guests today in case we don't get to it while we're on the call. But please do use those features. Also, feel free to use that chat feature to share any resources that you have and you want to share with other agents of impact today. And with that, over to you, David.
Great. Thank you, Zulema. Let's get started. I'm David Bank. I'm the editor of Impactalpha. It's great to see so many agents of impact. And as always, each of you could have been speakers. So introduce yourself on the chat, as Zulema said, and say where you're coming from in real life, as we used to say. And maybe free associate, like what one or two words comes to mind when you hear impact first. Let's say a quick hello to our guests. Caleb Ballou, Trimtab Impact, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
You're coming from where in real life?
I'm live from downtown New York, WeWork.
Okay. Margot Kane, welcome, Point Partners. Uh-oh. We're back to this problem. Okay. We'll work on that, but welcome, Margot. Greg Neichin, Ceniarth, a local. Where are you today, Greg?
Hey, David. Hey, everybody. I'm glad to be with you. Coming from Marin County, California.
Welcome. And Alex Evangelides, A to Z Impact, I think also a local out here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm up in Occidental, up in Sonoma County, so close by to the Bay.
Many of you I know will be coming to town, and we welcome you to SoCap or what have you in the next couple of days and weeks. We touted you all as redefining what the smart money means, so don't let me down. But let's first bring on Debra Schwartz from the MacArthur Foundation, who has been redefining smart money for a long time, including through the Catalytic Capital Consortium, which we've been delighted to have a long partnership with. So thank you, Debra, and for all that and for joining us today. All these folks work with what comes to be called family offices. Why are family offices so important, and how does that fit into the grand plan?
Well, thank you, David, and welcome to everyone on the screen, on the stream, on the chat, and all around. These calls are just such an incredible gift, I think, to all of us in the field, David. So thank you to you and your team for keeping us apprised of each other and connected in all kinds of ways. Family offices are definitely a part of the impact investing world that has been present since the beginning, but I think have grown and grown and grown in prominence and in influence and importance. And it's wonderful that you are shining a spotlight on this. We are excited about the launch of Trimtab, and we'll hear about that more from Caleb. And I know that's part of what sparked this terrific call. I think family offices are important because they have flexibility. They can be patient. They can be risk tolerant. That's the essence of our definition, working definition of catalytic capital. It is essential to be effective as an impact-first investor. The whole point of impact-first investing is recognizing that you prioritize impact, and you know that the markets don't always meet all the needs for capital that will deliver the goods and services, the projects, the resources to the people and the places and the purposes that we care about. I mean, this is in a lot of ways takes us back to the roots of impact investing, which came from the recognition that on the one hand, capital is essential and is powerful, and there's very little we can do to improve our world without it. And at the same time, capital markets do not serve all people, places, and purposes equally. Sometimes they can't, sometimes they won't. But the bottom line is there are many, many things that regular investors, constrained by a different set of rules than all of us here talking today, there are things that they don't consider valuable, they don't consider feasible, or maybe both. And impact investing was created to get into that gap, into that breach, and show what was possible, to make things investable, to crowd in and open the way for other forms of capital. So I couldn't be more excited to see that impact first, catalytic investing is bigger, better, and stronger than ever. And family offices are a huge, huge driver behind that shift. So back to you.
I told you, Debra, that we had called the surprising resurgence of impact first investing a little bit aspirationally, perhaps, but I think you said you could back me up that there is an increasing interest.
I think so, but I do at the same time think this is a little bit back to basics. I mean, I think the reason there's a resurgence is people really want to unleash the full power of impact investing, and that can't be done if we play only in one part of the capital spectrum. We have to have impact first as well as finance first strategies. We need all the capital that we can get.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Debra, and thank you for everything and our good partnership. Let's jump in with Caleb. And Caleb, unmute yourself. The Trimtab story, I think, has gotten a lot of attention because, just like Debra said, you redefined the rules a little bit. You redefined what the expectations are for the investors. You've redefined how you underwrite and think about deals. But before we get into the particulars of that, just tell us what this impulse was from the families that you were working with for doing impact first investing. Like, what are they trying to achieve?
Yeah, thanks so much, David, for having me on. A lot of my impact investing heroes are on this call, and so I'm very delighted to be here. A lot of folks that have been enormously helpful to Trimtab as well. I mean, the founding of Trimtab was a challenge from two women who are very capable impact investors to make impact first investing much more accessible to families like themselves. And it was incubated by The Impact, which is a network of high net worth families all around the world that range from, folks like Blue Haven that have deep expertise and entire teams dedicated to impact first investing, to others that are newer to the space and curious about what that strategy could look like. And the intuition that they had was one that I had also seen as a practitioner and an emerging, fund innovative finance investor for the last kind of 10 plus years as a practitioner. Which was that, look, there's a huge need for catalytic capital. But in addition to this being a nascent, fragmented, still hard to measure, hard to communicate space that also has an enormous amount of potential, there's just a fundamental infrastructure problem, which is that a lot of the expertise and experience in impact first investing comes from non-traditional intermediaries that look a lot like my fellow panelists, who are absolutely amazing at this work, and managing external capital is not a core part of their mandate. And so, how do you make this more accessible as more families are stepping up and have more interest in this sort of investing?
And just let's be crisp about it. When we say and when you say impact,
crisp.
When you say impact first, that means you're underwriting deals differently. You're thinking about the returns differently. Just as simply as possible. What does it mean to optimize for highest risk-adjusted impact?
Oh man, there's, I guess, probably very long and rambling, and then maybe an attempt at a much shorter, answer to that question.
Cut straight to that.
What we look for is fundamentally additionality. And yes, we look for proven interventions and counterfactual outcomes on the ground, as I'm sure all impact investors do. And for us, we also really take a view that we are investing in intermediaries that are also building their markets, that fundamentally are making capital access easier, capital access cheaper, for a whole host of promising social enterprises operating on the ground. And then for us, capital additionality is a huge part of it as well. So simply investing where others are not. And funds that are incredibly high potential often have endorsement and validation from proven sectoral and region experts, but are still struggling to hit that minimum viable product. And that is kind of at a back of the envelope level, the combination of factors that we look for. That actually does not really describe a risk or return profile, though. That can look like a returnable grant type of profile, and that can look like perceived risk arbitrage, where the primary barrier is just the enormously inefficient high premium of financial innovation in financial services. And right now we invest across all of those, and we look for kind of low single digits in our pilot portfolio as a blended return, but we underwrite for impact. We underwrite for multimodal additionality, not for a particular return threshold. And we come with capital that is patient, that is flexible, and is tailored to the needs of really promising fund managers that we want to support.
And so now I think this sets up well why Trimtab itself changes the rules, in the sense that it's not a, many folks could say just what you said, but they would have done it as a foundation, or they would have done it as a donor advised fund, or they would have done it in some tax advantaged way, or in a fund of funds of some sort. And you do it as I understand, an actual company, a holding company that has this equity completely at risk from your investors, and able to make investments as you see fit for the highest impact.
Yeah, absolutely. There were three things that we were really looking for when we set up our structure. And one is long-term mission integrity, and really a guard against mission drift. And you can achieve that through nonprofit structures. And you can also achieve that through other governance structures. And what we are is a public benefit corporation that's owned by a perpetual purpose trust. So instead of being governed by the IRS's guidelines around charitability and the rules around a nonprofit, we're governed by an independent board of experts that we think has an enormous amount of expertise and integrity, and has a fiduciary duty in this case to preserve the mission integrity of Trimtab itself. And the reason that we chose also a corporation was that the other factors that we were looking for, so operational efficiency, and also strategic flexibility, so we can launch funds if we so if that's going to be the right tool. We can engage in OCIO and advisory if that ultimately winds up being the right tool. We can issue equity and debt. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of the ultimate on-ramps, right, to engage more and more capital in the space through a range of products, and a corporate structure gives us that. And it also gives us the third thing that we look for, which is an enormous amount of flexibility to attract capital and to deploy capital in any form. And so we can deploy PRI-like capital, but unlike a nonprofit, we can also raise equity. And equity is what we have raised into our corporation to date, which is a really efficient way to just get started with the strategy and the operations, and with actually deploying investments without having to be an SEC regulated financial entity. We are a corporate holdco, and so that structure was designed for the mission, for the long-term mission, for hopefully an appropriate governance, but also to get us just up and started and take an action-oriented approach to engaging with this market, even as we preserve the flexibility to launch a whole range of products to engage capital as we go forward.
Great. And I know there's some great examples of investments you've already made, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, from our story, you've raised something like $60 million and are just getting going with other families and other investments. And I'd love to come back in a bit to some of the specific examples, the managers that you've backed and whatnot. But Margot, I think you're muted, but have we got a connection here?
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
All right,
Okay.
I'm sorry about that, you guys. My computer just decided to stop functioning this morning.
No worries, and thank you for persisting, and thank you for being here. And Margot, I know you've been dealing with the technical hassles, but I think you've been following along on the conversation, and I want to just be clear, I think, to what Trimtab is a little bit of a different category of thing because it's a collection of wealthy families that have come together and backed it. But each one of the rest of you are working with a wealthy family who's made a commitment to a certain kind of investing that puts impact first, as we've called it. And I want to kind of just probe a little bit of like what that decision point is for the funder, for the investor, and sort of essentially what your mandate is. What kind of returns in impact terms are you charged with delivering?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm Margot Kane, everyone, with the Point Partners. We were founded in Philadelphia in 2016 by the fifth generation of the Berwind family. And our mandate is to champion community-driven change and promote justice by investing in transformational leaders, networks, and solutions. And we were set up very intentionally to be very flexible, responsive, and nimble, and to really be built for purpose over convention or over tool. So we deploy impact investing, we deploy grants, we do various forms of organizational capacity building, we run learning fellowships and the like. And we have a set of impact strategies. The one where we're most active in terms of deploying impact investing is in our economic justice strategy, where our mandate is really to increase ownership of future growth markets amongst a more diverse and representative set of leaders and communities to basically increase prosperity and opportunity for all Americans. So when we think about where investments come into play, we really think about using investments as levers in terms of changing the various dynamics and the systems at play in capital markets. And when we think about return mandates, we are thinking about both financial and impact returns. So similar to Caleb's point, there's not like a singular return profile that applies here. It really is directly related to the impact you're trying to achieve, the markets in which you're playing with, and kind of what the return and economic parameters look within those markets, and the tool that you're using and what's appropriate for that tool. What kind of proof point are you trying to generate? Are you trying to crowd in more capital? Are you trying to lower the cost of capital? Are you trying to help scale a solution? So all of those things come into play. There's no kind of singular return profile. It could be market rate. You could beat market. It can be below market. But the real issue is that like you have that discipline and accountability to the impact you're trying to achieve, and that centers your decision making across the board.
Right, right. I know I took a look at SpringPoint's excellent website and database of all the investments, and you can sort them in various ways, including by the sort of social and economic justice and parameter and the investments. And there's a set of fund managers that you've backed, early emerging managers. And I know from our conversations that that's been an important strategy. And just how does impact first capital help, kind of make that ecosystem, accelerate that ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always a fun one, because we say that when we're supporting a kind of the next generation of investors, which is really what that work is, when we are doing that in the venture category, and I'm going to be specific about that particular category, we take an impact first approach, but we are backing people who are seeking market rate returns because those are necessary for the impact of those investors. It's necessary for their firm to survive. Market rate, of course, is a subjective construct and can mean lots of different things. So, we are really trying to back the next generation of managers who are going to make decisions differently, who are going to back overlooked founders and solutions, who are going to envision kind of a different way in which early stage risk-taking capital shows up in society. For them to have longevity, they have to post some form of returns that enables them to continue to raise from LPs with an allocation to early stage capital. Does it need to be 20x in 7 years? No, right? Because most venture capitalists, whether they're impact or not, don't actually achieve what we would consider market rate returns. So, in that case, that's
one of the hidden secrets of VC.
It's one of the hidden secrets. And it's like this return kind of like the false, the false goal of the return profile of whatever market is. Like, put two lawyers in a room and have them like come out when they've decided what market is, and they'll be there till they're dead. So it's not a real construct.
Especially in emerging markets. It's like add 500 basis points and even more uncertainty.
Right, exactly. And so like, how do we show up as impact first there? Well, we really tried to kind of co-design our approach with the fund managers. What do you need? How is coming in earlier or coming in late to close out your target going to be effective? How do we help you kind of show up well in terms of presenting to your other potential investors, whether they're impact or not? And so we are spending more time. We're taking outsized risks in certain ways, like being the first check-in, maybe being the largest check, maybe being the first institutional check, but it doesn't mean we're taking necessarily a concessionary return.
We talked earlier this year about Cherry Rock Capital. I think
Mhm.
one that you were first early in and got to a big raise. Is there any
Yeah.
issue where the fund managers don't want to have impact first, or what could be considered impact capital, because their other LPs might actually think that means they're not going to give them those, outsized returns that they may or may not, that may or not be realistic?
Well, all money is green. and I will say, we temper how we show up in ways. So we don't, lead with the headline. We're impact first when we're presenting to a more market-oriented audience of LPs or GPs necessarily. We don't mandate that our GPs have an impact first mandate, obviously, in venture specifically. But I think, the kinds of GPs we back are doing this because they are mission driven. And so they see that values alignment in us, and they like to have us involved because of that mission alignment, because we understand where they're coming from. We want to help them be successful. And we're really, we're not in it for just a singular profit-driven purpose. I think, we're all careful about our language and how we show up in different spaces. I think for fund managers, especially when you're underrepresented, especially when you're first time fund manager, having the impact moniker attached can be viewed as a disadvantage. But I think some of that is like temporary political and bias based, because if you look at the actual data that's coming out, it's not a disadvantage in terms of performance. And so I think I'm hopeful people can kind of grow out of that a little bit. And LPs that find it to be a dissuasion to be associated with anything for impact, well, they know where their values are, and they can find GPs who share those values.
Terrific. And I mentioned the one example, but as I said to Caleb, think of another one or two, and we'll come back around to that. And just to your last point, and maybe this is a handoff to Alex, underline that the impact first does not mean you won't make a good return, because if you actually believe the Impactalpha thesis, then that impact actually can help drive returns. And sometimes it takes a bit of catalytic capital to get that flywheel going, but over time it can be a big business. And I think that's the part of the thesis. And Alex, maybe just pick up on all that, but maybe start a little bit with the origin story and kind of what you were charged with delivering for your investor.
Sure. And thanks for having me. I'm Alex with A to Z Impact. Similar to the Ceniarth and Spring Points, we're a single kind of family office, family foundation, founded by Jeff and Mike Kaplan, their brothers out of New York. I think where the A to Z origin story came from, was a discontent with the status quo. I think A to Z predates me. They've been working on this for a couple of years and had operated it fairly traditionally, right? Which is sort of what you're supposed to do with a foundation or family office. You invest a pot of the money in what Jeff likes to lovingly call greed-only investments. And so, market rate, only thinking about return. And then they were also thinking about philanthropy. How do we make the world a better place? How do we do good in the world? And that disconnect, I think, was what sort of, drove the origin story of A to Z. Is there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way that we can bring these two worlds together so that we're stopped talking out of both sides of our mouth, and we actually do one unified thing that both allows us to be a sustainable organization, hopefully, and allows us to kind of create as much good in the world as we can. And I think that's where the idea for A to Z came from, was really this hypothesis was, hey, can we find a way, if we are willing to flex on the dimension of financial return, if we're willing to take a lower return profile than others, can we create as much, more impact than we might otherwise? And in doing that, can we also find a way to return our capital enough that we can keep recycling it, that we can stay in the game, that we can be, have this flywheel approach where we can use our pot of money more than once, right? And I think that's sort of when I joined A to Z, what we were really experimenting with, and kind of what we've been after these last, 4 or 5 years as we've really ramped up.
That sort of does underscore something which might be obvious, which is that one reason why family offices have always been seen as a fertile ground for raising and mobilizing catalytic capital was that there is an investor who can decide what they want to do with his or her money in it differently than pension funds and others that have, fiduciary responsibilities of various sorts, and that's been alluded to. But so you've just made the case that they have to change their return expectations in order to enable this strategy. And that gives you some flexibility. Where have you found that impact first, capital is most valuable or even indispensable?
Sure. I'd say I'll make 2 points there. First is I think impact first capital can mean totally different things to totally different people, and I want to make sure I'm not talking in a different way. I think for us, what impact first capital means is we are willing to take a lower return threshold. But in doing that, we as a firm have decided that our mandate and what we want to prove is that we can take a lower return profile without taking too much additional risk. We are focused on a capital preservation strategy and trying to figure out, is there a way that we can, even though we're taking, if you're accepting 15, 20% returns, you can afford for an investment or two to go bad because you're going to make it up on the upside of the others. If you're underwriting 3 or 4% returns and you have a couple things go bad, you're going to end up in the red pretty quickly. And so I think many people hear impact first and they think high risk, high risk, high risk. We're going to do things that are super catalytic, that we're probably going to lose all of our money. For us, that's not the case. When we say impact first, we mean we're willing to concede on the upside. We're willing to take a below market rate return, but we want to find a capital preservation strategy. And so that's what I mean by impact first. What's important for us when we're looking at individual deals in that vein is, why do you need money at a below market rate, right? What does that unlock for you as a particular fund or direct organization? And so, a good and easy example here is the Deerfield Fund, I think, is a great one. And this is a program in Colorado that is essentially helping first-time homeowners buy their house and put money towards a down payment. It's structured in a way where Deerfield Fund gets paid back a percentage of the profit of the house. If the homeowner makes money on the house appreciating, they get a percentage of it. If Deerfield Fund was trying to achieve a market rate return, they would take a much larger percentage of that appreciation. They'd take 25%, they'd take 30%, they'd take 40%, and they'd say, that's what I need to give my LPs a market rate return. But in LPs coming into that fund and saying, hey, we're comfortable with only earning 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%, that means Deerfield can go to their borrowers and say, we're only going to take 5% of the appreciation. We're going to take a very low amount. And so those are the types of situations where I can get comfortable as an investor saying, I'm happy to give up my return because my return is underpinning your ability to have more impact at the end borrower. And when we can find opportunities like that, where there's a clear link between me sacrificing a little bit of upside and that actually getting into the hands of the people we want it to, that's a no-brainer for us.
That's an excellent example. And we had Deerfield actually in the brief this morning in the context of, it really is about the shares that go to different, call them stakeholders in any deal. And you're saying that these homeowners, these first-time home buyers, can get improved livelihoods, lower costs, better financial security if just to be blunt about it, the wealthy person takes a smaller cut.
100%. So much of it is really just about how do we cut the pie differently? And if you as the LP, if you as the investor, if you as the wealthier family are willing to take a smaller piece of the pie, it can go somewhere else, right? And we want to make sure it goes to a place that we think is, impactful. But I think it's as simple as that in terms of the sacrifice we're asking people to make. It's just give up a little piece of that pie, take a little bit less of it. And I think a lot of good things can happen if you do.
Great, great. And again, I'm going to cue you up in a bit, each of you, for an example. One we picked out for you, but you're free to choose another, was M squared. But let's jump to Greg and Ceniarth, because that was a good segue, Greg. As you maybe, I don't know if I can put you on the spot to recount what you know is my favorite quote from Diane, but it picks up on what Alex was just saying about what is the mandate that you've been given, in Ceniarth, and then you can take off on how you actually fulfill the mandate.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, David. And it's great to be on a virtual stage with some of my best impact friends. I think we'll know it's a resurgence in Impact First when Debra, Margot, Alex, and I are not on these calls. I think we are the surge of Impact First. So it'll be a resurgence when there's 4 new people who can take up the mantle, 5 new people, and we don't have to be on this. But I always enjoy the company of these folks, and they make it easier to talk when they have such articulate explanations. As you know, David, there are probably few questions that irk Diane more than asking her to sort of talk about her journey or why has she done this. And if you catch her on an irritable day, she'll probably just say, "What else would I do?"
Just to interject, if you want to hear that, we have a podcast from several years ago.
Right. I think that actually she and I have talked a lot about this constant questioning of family offices of why are you doing this? And I think that we were actually just talking this morning about how, the ultimate beneficiaries of all of these transactions, whether they're low-wage workers in the deep South, or they're small farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, or they're shop owners in Latin America, they don't care. They don't care why we do this. They don't care if we're in this work because we feel guilty about having money, or we're religious and we think it's our duty, or we're sitting in lotus pose on a mountaintop, or we're on a yacht. They really, what they care about, as Margot said, is that money is green, and is money getting into the communities that actually help vulnerable and marginalized people. So I think in many ways, family offices need to be a little less precious about their sort of why stories, and just get on with the fact that, deliver capital into communities that need that capital. And that's really what matters. And that's the journey that, we've been on at Ceniarth from day one. There was not a lot of hand wringing. Diane, from the very beginning said, how do we get money into vulnerable and marginalized places? She had come from a development background and had a lot of experience in pure aid-based, grant-based intervention. She had skepticism of them. She said, hey, I don't want to touch those. Let's explore this world of impact investing. And so that's what we set out to do 12 years ago. And I think along the way, what we found was a lot of what Alex just summarized, was that for us, for us and our mandate of getting dollars into those kinds of communities, the idea of double bottom line market rate stuff just didn't fit. We recognized that to get money into the communities we wanted to serve, it was going to have to be impact first. It was going to have to be below market, below commercial, below whatever these words are that we want to use. And that's what we've been doing for 12 years.
I think one of the thoughts is that that you have a different kind of logic. So you don't have so market rate, as Margaret said, doesn't really make sense, because the logic is about the integrity and the sort of sustainability, resilience of the model itself. But how do you know something is not just a bad investment, right? How do you know that it's a good investment?
Yeah, look, the only reason why I think these conversations are confusing is we try to have them in these forums where there are investor type people. If this if we were having these forums among grant makers, amongst philanthropists, this wouldn't be so confusing. None of this is confusing. We're all just trying to use capital to have measurable, demonstrable impacts on sectors that matter to us, right? So I think we increasingly are really having this conversation in forums that are purely philanthropic. You know, we have them with development institutions or we have them with other philanthropists. We're really not trying to, you know, put square pegs in round holes to try to get people to think about this work differently. We're just trying to approach people who, again, come from an impact first mentality. They have money, they have control of money, they want to direct it to areas in the world they want to see change. So sure, in terms of how do we measure it, in any given intervention, we're going to measure it differently. We invest across a wide range of sectors, from CDFIs in the US to agrifinance in sub-Saharan Africa. So how we measure, you know, income increases per farmer in you know, Zambian agribusiness is very different than how we're going to measure you know, livelihood resilience for a business owner, SME business owner in Mississippi. But I think in each and every case, we are going to be, you know, very rigorous and very measured about the impact that we're trying to achieve from that given intervention.
Great. Maybe the best way to make this concrete is an example, and we'll start you off, and then we'll sort of maybe go backwards around the circle again. So if there is something that, you know, is particularly makes the point of something that Ceniarth, you know, got into and helped make happen with a kind of capital that operated on a different logic, that'd be great. And if the others can take yourself off mute and be ready to chime in as well.
Sure. So I always like these calls, and it's SOCAP next week too, and I'm on panels because
we're on the same panel.
Forces me to like go back and look at what did we do this year, and actually it's always this moment. We do actually so much that often I forget the deals that we actually loved at the beginning of the year. So so it's kind of a great exercise. So I want to highlight three things. I'll be very fast, but there are three archetypes of deals just to give a sense. So archetype number one are hybrid organizations. Okay, so nonprofits that are primarily grant-based organizations, but have some revenue-generating component that they need to finance through working capital. This has become a huge class of deals we do. So 1 Acre Fund, which is one that was referenced in the reading for this call that we did with MacArthur and many others, that's a great example of that. This year, we financed an organization called Accesso, which is very similar to 1 Acre, but operating in Latin America. And just really good example of a loan to an organization that has lots of grant-based funding. It's an easy loan to make because these organizations have lots of cash reserves from their grant makers, but they can get you know, they can get leverage from a very low interest loan. I would say second deal type is high impact funds and intermediaries that combine technical assistance with, you know, high impact lending. So this is the typical class of things we like, are high impact microfinance investment vehicles. We talk a lot about our work with global partnerships or MC Social Capital or Deakin or Kiva. But this past year, we helped fund something called GAWA's Kuali Fund, which is a MIV very focused on climate lending and helping MFIs you know, create, you know, very targeted focused sustainability products. And then the last deal type of archetype are just these sectors that are always going to need low interest capital to continue to do the work they've been doing for decades. CDFIs are the classic example of that. We provided another loan to Rock USA this year, one of our favorites in sort of the ownership meets CDFI category. We're working on deals with California FarmLink and Grameen America right now. These organizations have been around forever. They do great work. They just need 2 or 3% capital to just keep doing that great work.
Because you all know each other, as you mentioned, Greg, you've often co-invested with each other. I think, if I understand, there's even a kind of a deal club where you share leads and things. I know one that we wrote up the other day, the lessons from the 1 Acre Fund, I know Debra and MacArthur was involved with that as well. If that's a Debra, I don't know if you want to make a point about that deal, or Greg, why that was an interesting. There was both wins and maybe not quite losses, but wins and setbacks in that whole saga there. But it was an early big example.
Thanks, David. I would actually defer to Greg, because the person who's the lead for that transaction for my team is not, at least on the screen that I can see. And I know Greg has worked very closely with One Acre, even preceding the transaction that we did together. I would just say that I think the typology that Greg just laid out is super helpful and instructive. And I think in particular, teasing out the difference between the need for working capital or, say, startup capital, which wasn't in the framework, but I think when we start looking at some of the venture and for-profit side of things, it's similar. And then distinguishing that from the sort of inherent market-driven reasons that long-term low-cost capital may not be something that evolves into, not everything is on that sort of lovely trajectory or journey to something else. A lot of times we're dealing with math problems that have to do with the incomes of people and the costs of living and all the things. And the only way you square the math problem is to have a CDFI playing the roles that Greg's describing. So I really like that typology, and I defer to you, Greg, on anything further on One Acre.
Sure. I'll just make one quick comment on the One Acre example, because they did a good job of publicly writing it up and publicly talking about what didn't go great. And what didn't go great was the scale of crowded in dollars, right? I think we all believe that we're going to put in subordinate capital, we're going to have guarantees, and then magically all of a sudden, like big, commercial investors or pension investors are going to show up and provide loads of de-risk senior capital. The reality is that the perceived risk of these transactions is still too high. Those senior tranches are in some cases insanely de-risked. They are free money, like for whoever wants to do those senior tranches. But folks really still can't get over the fact that ultimately the dollars from that vehicle are going to finance small farmers. There's just a perception of risk that they don't want to touch these sectors. So I think that's the challenge. I think that is a place that, development institutions and pension funds who have very sort of mandated reasons for doing them will do them. And I hope to see more of that. But I think it's still very hard to crowd in this money, even when you have a lot of subordinate, subordinate backing.
Terrific. Thank you, Greg. And that was super helpful. And I'm trying to navigate the questions that are coming in hot and heavy from the chat as well. And you're seeing that as well. But let me just give you each a chance to talk about an example, but also to say anything else that the conversation has sparked in you that needs to be said. I'd love to get you to mix it up with each other as well. And I don't know whether, Caleb, you started it off, so maybe start us off again if you can take yourself off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say I think the archetypes Greg laid out certainly make sense. I also just think in general there is sort of a staggering amount, a lamentably long pipeline, as we call it, of capital entrepreneurs that are piloting solutions that just are not a fit historically for, philanthropic and commercial strategies. And there's a huge need for catalytic capital specifically focused on funds, and, perceived risk is a major barrier. And so, we see an archetype in addition to some of those that Greg laid out, where there sort of is this potential for kind of asymmetric impact, as we call it, like actually a very high floor, kind of expert validated solutions that might even be heavily subsidized by junior capital and have been completely unable to raise mezzanine or senior capital sufficient enough to actually launch the idea that they are trying to launch, and are not only generating, significant on-ground outcomes, but actually are piloting solutions that can crowd more fund manager participation in their markets, that are highly replicable, that are demonstrating, what we call kind of fungible track record. And, because there is such a robust pipeline and such a lack of capital, this is where Trimtab kind of comes in and often energizes and uses the expertise of folks like those on this call to say, can you share some of your most impressive, your most interesting pipeline? And is there an opportunity for Trimtab to come in with a $1 to $4 million investment to help make the difference, to actually hitting that first close and launching that demonstration product, and often in, frankly, a highly risk efficient way. And then we have, another category of investments that is much more early phase incubation. And we do kind of think about managing risk at the overall portfolio level and kind of different archetypes of innovation and scale and which kind of capital you're going to engage. But I'll just say that we see such an imbalance between the availability of capital and those that are investing with these types of strategies, and the actual pipeline that is high integrity, that is high potential, that it allows for kind of a huge range of possibility. And when combined with, I think, a very collaborative and a very expert sector that is willing to share, there just is a lot of opportunity for more efficient deployment. And that's kind of one of the things that's one of the ways that we see our portfolio, and also that we see the space more broadly.
You made an interesting point when we talked for the story a couple of weeks ago, that the slowness of some of these strategies to be able to raise money gave you time to be able to evaluate them, and the fact that they were so capital hungry also made it possible for you to have a rich pipeline. Margot and Alex, please jump in. There's a question from Tracy Gray, which you can take in course. Is how are you all working with thinking or persuading your peers who have begun to pull back out of fear? So there's a notion about the moment that we're in and how that affects the work. So if you could work that into your thoughts as well.
Sure. I'll kick off since I managed to unmute myself for a hot second. Sorry. I think one of the things that you're hearing here on the call is that, first of all, impact first doesn't mean investment second. Like, you have to do both very well. And there's a whole world in terms of what that means and how it can show up. And it also demands, in many cases, a portfolio approach. So, the archetypes that Greg laid out is an example of how impact first folks can, balance these concerns using a wider range of considerations than what kind of conventional portfolio management includes. But even conventional portfolio management doesn't only optimize for returns. You're optimizing for concentration risk, correlation risk. Are you exacerbating any risk, right? So you see that in like the climate space, especially. And I think the portfolio approach, when we think about impact first, has actually been very helpful for us to talk about the kind of like range of return risk profiles, liquidity profiles that you're taking. So the kind of overall package of risk is also a helpful lens to Tracy's question of, when people are pulling back, to try to have that conversation in a portfolio sense. Like, how much risk are you actually taking when you are taking an impact first approach relative to the rest of your kind of assets under management or the platform under which you're operating? And not to focus so much on this like singular risk. And also, how are these impact oriented investments offsetting some of the risks from what may live elsewhere in your wealth picture? How might you be sort of like hedging in some ways by investing in more impact driven investments and counteracting? I mean, we talk about this in the foundation endowment model, right? Where like you've got 95% of your assets that in some cases may be directly counteracting your grant work. So I think the portfolio lens can be really helpful for people because it also provides maybe like an easier entry point because you can start small. We are an impact first platform. We were intentionally created that way from the outset by the family, but that's not where everyone's coming from. So I think creating easy access points is one of the ways to help people tamp down on that kind of reactive nature.
Great. Alex, you promised to be fast on the unmute. There you go.
There you go. I got it. Maybe I'll talk about one deal and try to tie it to a bigger picture, which is, I think, like kind of to Tracy's point, when people are pulling back. One of the roles I think Impact First money can help with is helping us to utilize all the capital that is available to its maximum potential. One of the Greg archetypes you talked about, the first one was around sort of these nonprofits and helping them free up capital. And I think we all, in the wake of USAID and what's happening in development, we're seeing a real pullback on the philanthropic side, on the grant making side. And I don't want to overblow it. Like, I think there's a lot of narrative around like philanthropy's dead and grant making is going to dwindle. And I really hope that doesn't happen. Like, we absolutely need that type of capital. And so we, even as investors, like I'm sitting here and I'm like, we can't afford to get rid of that money. But what it makes all the more important is that organizations and nonprofits are able to use their grant dollars to the most of its potential. And so like a good example for us is we have an organization called Bridges to Prosperity that operates in East Africa. Very simply, they build rural footbridges that connect rurally isolated communities, and they get paid by the government to do that. However, the government is slow at paying. The government likes to take their time, and maybe it takes 6 months to pay their invoice, or maybe it takes 9 months to pay their invoice. And so the more Bridges to Prosperity grows and the more impact they have, what ultimately means is the more money they have sitting outstanding, waiting to get repaid by the government. And that means if that's funded by their philanthropic budget, that means $1 million or $2 million that they could be using to pay their team or to innovate or to test a new product or service is just sitting in accounts receivable. And I think what we like to do as Impact First investors is say, hey, look, let's help you be more efficient. We'll give you a loan for that. We'll give you a low-cost line of credit so that you can borrow against those government receivables. And therefore, you can take the precious grant money and spend it on things that are actually catalytic to you as a business. And I think that's always important, but especially right now when that money is getting even harder to come by, like Impact First investors getting creative about finding ways to free up capital for nonprofits, the money that's already there, I think that can also be really, really impactful.
Great. There's a question from Bjorn Sture at Roots of Impact, I think, about sort of management and ongoing kind of oversight, and particularly, what do you do if a fund or a direct investment is underperforming on impact? Like, I think we wrote up several years ago a show of hands at the gin whether anybody had ever ended an investment because it didn't deliver the impact, and not a single hand went up. So it's not clear whether folks have been managing impact as tightly as they might have been managing financial returns. How do you think about that? And anybody can jump in, but you're all on mute now, so.
I mean, I think in our world, it's easy to manage. We're primarily a lender, so there are lots of opportunities for off ramps when renewals come up on an annual basis. It's something we look at, constantly. There are plenty of deals that we have chosen to not renew if folks are diverging from our thesis, or if folks have, in the rare cases, graduated to larger capital providers. So I think it's one of the blessings of being a credit provider as opposed to an equity investor. We get a lot of turnover in our portfolio. I think that's true even on the fund side. Even our credit managers, the duration of those funds tends to be a little bit shorter than your average equity fund. So our decision to follow on in funds, we also get a lot of looks at those things. It just helps. I mean, I don't, for folks who do equity, I wouldn't know, but probably a different answer.
I can weigh in.
Great.
As we don't only do equity, but it's probably the majority of our portfolio, and it can be harder to extricate yourself. But I will say that an impact fail is a bigger deal for us than a finance fail. And it comes up, I mean, we're doing it in review with our investment committee and our portfolio review, and our team is being held accountable for those results, as we are also having those conversations with our portfolio partners. They will know if we are not happy about that, and or why we are not renewing, because we see this divergence of kind of mission and values alignment. And if the basis on which we made the investment and what we hope to learn together and what you hope to create together doesn't come to fruition as an impact, as well as with financial returns, like that's, you know, that's a lessons learned moment. And we have absolutely declined to follow on because of that. But it does take longer on the equity side typically.
I think we warned everybody that the hour goes by very fast, and indeed it has. But I do want to give each of you a chance to sort of wrap it up with a kind of either call to action or looking forward or next steps, or what would you like people to take away from the call, you know, as concisely as you can. And we may flop over a few minutes into the next hour. And folks, obviously, if they have to jump for something else, that's, you know, thank you for joining. But let's do that, and then we'll send folks off to actually do the work. So, and if any of you have to jump at the hour, I think Alex, you said so maybe jump in first with the rousing call to action.
Oh gosh, I have to think of a nice bow to tie on this conversation. Thanks everyone. I mean, this has been a really fun chat, and always happy to do this, you know, one-on-one or chat with more people offline. What's my call to action? You know, I think building off of something kind of Margot said about the portfolio approach and running counter a little bit to what Greg said around like this, like, if we're only in a room with philanthropists, this is an easier conversation, which is true. Like absolutely, like the philanthropic audience understands this conversation and the need for this type of capital much more than the investor does. At the same time, I think we as A to Z really hope that we can crack both audiences, right? We really hope that we can find a way to not just convince more philanthropists to add this as a you know, another tool to their tool belt, but how do we find more, you know, high net worth families? How do we find more investor pots of capital that are willing to take a portfolio approach? Remember that carving out a sleeve of impact first capital is not going to be your retirement account. It's not going to be the money that you're, you know, using to sleep at night. And be okay with taking a little bit less return to have a little bit more impact. And I think that's the thing that we debate and talk endlessly about internally, is like, how do we create a model and create a track record and create the proof points to allow other families to join the space. And I'm glad that like Caleb and Trimtabs are here, because in truth, like most families are not going to do what Ceniarth and Spring Point and A to Z have done and hire a team and build their own strategy and do this. And so we need a lot more of the Calebs of the world and the Trimtabs of the world that are building products, that are building funds, that are building offerings that are off the shelf, that have a high impact validity. And as a family or as someone that's curious, I can just sort of set it and forget it and say, hey, look, I'm going to make this commitment and I don't have to build out a team. And so I hope more families get excited about this. And I hope more folks like Trimtab come up so that there's places for them to put their money that are easier and easier.
Caleb, do you want to take that, or do you want to wait for the others to also sing Trimtab's?
No. I mean, thanks so much, Alex. And I mean, I'll just say, like, what's exciting to us is that families are interested in doing more of this, and that the pipeline more than justifies much more capital engagement from flexible pools of capital than currently exists. And I think the willingness now of the market to take an action-oriented approach to developing this market maybe is an encouraging sign and something that's a little bit new. Sorry, can I get my internet seems to be.
That's good, and thank you. And Debra and Greg, you
am I still? Sorry, let's see. Sorry, I froze for like 30 seconds there. Apologies. Let me just say, like, I just be collaborative as much as you possibly can. I think the actual sourcing and expertise functionality of this market and of the folks that are deploying this capital is extraordinary. And I think, you know, the actual collaboration of this space and the willingness to share pipeline, to share diligence, which, by the way, we do. And if anyone is interested in what we're looking at or in looking at our investment memos, please just reach out. I think in ways small, like looking at deals together, and in ways big, like thinking about how do you actually create more liquidity for folks that are really good at sourcing and execution, but maybe their balance sheet doesn't make sense for holding a bunch of 10+2, funds? Or how do you create, index fund vehicles that actually just leverage the expertise of the space and create rules-based mechanisms for deploying catalytic capital into deserving fund managers? I think there's such a host of opportunity to think about collaboration at the practitioner level and engaging new sources of capital that I think are stepping up, and it's incredibly exciting because the pipeline is there, and these capital entrepreneurs face unbelievable barriers to doing what they're doing, and they're doing it incredibly well. And so I think that's what energizes us.
Okay, the pipeline is there. Greg and Debra, do you want to cap it off in some way? Maybe Greg
Margot,
first.
you got Margot, you got it. You got any final
want me to-
words?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Greg.
No, I mean, I'll go. I just want
no,
to
I'm happy to. I'll be fast though. But I think to the resurgence point, maybe it's just a surgence to what Greg said. I think that these pools of capital that are emerging that have flexibility, so are not bound by these institutional, constraints, starting with purpose before convention and centering impact as a design kind of first principle, that is really exciting. And I think what I would encourage everyone, at the cusp of that decision making to consider is, like, we know that purpose is the key to contented life for humans and organizations. So, like, what is your purpose? And we kind of substituted profit for purpose in financial services and investment for a really long time, and we know that doesn't lead to the outcomes we want to see. So, like, when you center your purpose, a lot more things suddenly become possible, whether it's investing in a Trimtab, whether it's building your own team and your own strategy, whether it's like really deep collaboration. Ultimately, I think this is about, like, what is our role in society, both as individuals and organizations, and we can be a lot more bold and visionary around that.
Love that. Center your purpose, and it all becomes a little bit simpler.
I've got maybe a sort of minor practical one. I think everything everyone else has covered is excellent. I would, +1 on all of it. I think that we have a real sort of supply demand mismatch in the impact first world right now. Like, I would guess that of the 200 people that joined this call, 195 of them were on the money seeking side versus the money funding side. So I mean, one of my sort of calls to action, and this is a call to action to ourselves, because we're not always good at this, but a call to action to the entire sort of investor side of things is get to faster no's this year. Like, I actually think we can waste some folks' time when we are not entirely clear about what it is we fund, or we hesitate to say no. But I think it's hard to know that sometimes, like, the best thing for somebody is just to hear no. Like, we don't write equity checks. We don't do venture debt into unprofitable enterprises. Like, there are certain things that we're just never going to do, even if it's like the best idea in the world. So I think that, clarity on that, I think, will help everything sort of, lubricate the wheels of action.
Great. That is a very practical thing that I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate. Debra, you've been hanging in. I appreciate it. So
conversation, so many good points, and good points of difference too. So good job, David, to you and your team for putting all the right folks on this topic of the surge, right? A family office, the rise of family office and impact first investing. My number one call to action is, let's all keep reading and engaging with Impactalpha so that we continue to have this community for learning and connecting. In my view, no one does a better job than Impactalpha in writing up the complex impact first type of investments that we're all making, so that we can actually share them and learn from them. So that would be my number one thing. Let's remember that really hard problems, market failures, bias, misjudged risk, whatever you want to look at, economic mismatch, hard problems are hard to solve, and we will always need the full continuum of capital, including the resources you guys are putting to work every day that are solving things in an impact first, tool second mode, and making sure that the capital that's being deployed makes sense. And I love, love, love Margot's point that impact first does not mean investment second. You do have to make sure these are actually investments. So maybe that's like my number one thing that I'm going to take away and shamelessly spread around afterward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and that is great. And there's some questions we didn't get to. We will put them all to the panelists and in the roundup. And thank you all for being so active on the chat. I couldn't quite keep up with it. I just want to say, just in closing, we've been sort of promoting this meme, I guess, that LP equals leadership potential. In addition to limited partner, and I think you all have demonstrated that premise. So thank you all for being with us. And I think the other thing is when I was trying out this resurgence idea, which maybe is we've demoted to surgence. The response I get was, if not the number of families or funders, but the commitment and the ability to step up and sort of own it and inhabit it of those funders is increasing. So you guys have all demonstrated that for a long time, and we appreciate it. And send all the newcomers our way, and we'll write them up as well and bring them on the next call. So thanks all for joining us, and thanks to all the agents of impact on the call, and we'll see you next time.